we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 16th year of the Newburyport Literary Festival. This is our second year in this virtual format. There goes my old-fashioned timekeeper.
It's a little fast.
I know. You got the 11 o'clock one, so we have to sit through a whole bunch of chimes, but each room in my house has a distracting element, and the clock in this room is one of them. So anyway, welcome again to the 16th year of the Newburyport Literary Festival. I just wanted to review our format here. We are on the webinar feature of Zoom, which means that you can see us and the presentation, but we cannot see you. If you'd like to chat with your fellow attendees, let us know where you're from. If you're a festival regular, please use the chat feature. If you'd like to ask Eric a question, the author a question, or me, please use the Q&A feature. It's easier for us to keep track of questions. My name is Bethany Graftorow. I am a writer and historian. For today's purposes, I am the host and member of the Newburyport Literary Festival Steering Committee. And in that capacity, I have the ability to help invite speakers to the festival. And Eric J Dolan is certainly one of our favorites. We've had him on here for several years now and have become quite good friends. So before I introduce you to him, I would like to encourage all of you to please support our local bookstores. We have two that we work with very closely here in this area, Jabberwocky Bookshop in Newburyport and the Bookshop of Beverly Farms. So obviously, if you have a local bookshop that is nearer to you, please support that bookshop as well. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Eric J Dolan, who is the author of 14 books, many of which are favorites in rotation in my house. His most recent is A Furious Sky, a 500-year history of America's hurricanes, which received a number of accolades, including being chosen by the Washington Post as one of the 50 notable works of nonfiction in 2020, by Kirkus Reviews as one of the best nonfiction books, also of 2020, in addition to being a Kirkus Prize finalist, by the Library Journal and Book List as one of the best science and technology books of 2020, and by the New York Times Book Review as an editor's choice. Other books include Leviathan, The History of Whaling in America, which was chosen as one of the best nonfiction books of 2007 by the Los Angeles Times and the Boston Globe, and also won, also won the 2007 John Lyman Award for U.S. Maritime History, and Black Flags, Blue Waters, The Epic History of America's Most Notorious Pirates, which was chosen as a must-read book for 2019 by the Massachusetts Center for the Book, and was a finalist for the 2019 Julia Ward Howe Award given by the Boston Athenaeum. Is that right?
No, given by the Boston Book Club.
That's hilarious because
not by the Athenaeum.
my little write-up cut off after the word Boston. So I'm going to wing it from here on.
By the Boston Red Sox, yes.
There you go, by the Boston Red Sox. So it is my great pleasure to introduce you to my friend and a festival favorite, Eric J Dolan. And you're on.
Thank you, Bethany. Thank you very much for inviting me, you and Glee. It's I think this is the 5th or 6th time I've been here. I really wish I could be in person. It's been a very strange year. I've given a lot of these talks. I still can't quite get used to it. I love being in person and being able to connect with people. But anyway, thanks for showing up on this rainy day in Massachusetts. Now, when I was writing this book, I came across a number of really great stories, one of which involved a little vessel called the Watch and Wait, which in August of 1635 sailed from Ipswich to Marblehead, Massachusetts, carrying 23 people aboard, including Anthony Thacker, his wife, and their 4 children. Late in the day, a hurricane roared in right when they were off Cape Ann, and the Watch and Wait was sent smashing into an uninhabited island off of Cape Ann. The ship broke apart. Everybody was flung into the water. Of all the people on board, only 2 of them survived, Anthony Thacker and his wife. They managed to swim ashore nearly naked, and they stayed on this uninhabited island for 5 days, surviving off of the bits of food that had washed ashore from the wreck. And then finally, a small fishing vessel came by. They flagged it down and were able to get back to the mainland. Now, when the Massachusetts legislature heard about Anthony Thacker's horrible travails, they decided to award him the island upon which he had crashed, which we all know today as Thacker Island, which is part of Rockport, Massachusetts, and has these two beautiful twin lighthouses on it. Then there's this story from the Miami hurricane of 1926, a little bit to the north of Miami in Fort Lauderdale. There was a couple that was in their house when the hurricane struck. The waves crushed the house, pinning the husband under the rubble. His wife couldn't wrench him free, so she knelt next to him as the water rose and held his head high to keep him from drowning. He begged her to leave him behind and save herself as the water crept higher, nearing his chin and partially submerging her. Finally, she relented, gave him a kiss, and said goodbye forever. Now, then there's this story from the Great Hurricane of 1938, which slammed into Long Island in New England on September 21st, 1938. On that morning, there was a man on the tip of Long Island who had been eagerly awaiting a box that would have within it his gleaming new barometer. The box came that morning. He opened it. Out came the barometer, and instantly he became very annoyed because the needle on the barometer was pointing to a reading that was so low it could only mean one of two things. Either a hurricane had already arrived or one was fast approaching. Yet when he looked out to the water was calm, the sun was shining, and it didn't look like any bad weather was on the way. So he sat down and he wrote an angry note to the manufacturer, got in his car, drove to the local post office to mail it. He shouldn't have been so rash, because by the time that he returned from the post office, the hurricane had washed his home and his precious barometer away. Now, A Furious Sky contains many other stories like this, but it's far more than just a litany of death and destruction. It also weaves together a great range of captivating themes. There's the intriguing history of meteorology, the influence of hurricanes in the course of empire, the outcomes of war and the fortunes of individuals. Critical innovations in communication, aviation, computer, and satellite technology play an important part, as does the women's movement and its role in the naming of hurricanes. In the end, the history of America's hurricanes forces us to confront thorny questions of how we can learn to survive and adapt from the continued barrage that is certainly to come from the greatest storms on Earth. Hurricanes are an inevitable and painful part of the American experience. Just as we can count on the sun rising and setting each day, so too can we count on hurricanes periodically visiting our shores. If you're among the many tens of millions of people who live on the East Coast, the Gulf Coast, or the Caribbean, or Hawaii, hurricanes are looming threats that might invade your life. The hurricane season officially runs from June 1st to November 30th. In an average year, 6 hurricanes dance over the Atlantic, 3 of which are major hurricanes, which is defined as having winds of at least 111 miles per hour, sustained winds. Typically, 2 hurricanes make landfall in an average year, and a major one pummels us once every 2 years. Now, hurricanes are not equal opportunity offenders. While 21 coastal states, including Massachusetts, of course, have been hit by hurricanes, residents of Florida, Texas, North Carolina, Louisiana, and South Carolina take the brunt of the punishment, with Florida alone accounting for 40% of all hurricane strikes. Here in New England, we can expect to get clobbered once every 10 years by a hurricane, and I think we're coming due for another hurricane in the next 5 or 10 years, just based on the law of averages. And if you have been watching the news recently, you know that the current prediction for the upcoming hurricane season is that it's going to be a particularly wild one, much stronger than usual, with many more storms. Hurricanes have left an indelible mark on American history. Since 1980, they have accounted for roughly 50% of all the costs of natural disasters that have cost more than $1 billion. And going back to the late 1800s, hurricanes have killed at least 30,000 people. In this picture, this is a really gruesome picture while I was working on the the book of the Galveston Hurricane. I am not convinced, I'm pretty sure it's real, but something about it makes me think it might have been staged. But nevertheless, as we get to later, 6,000 people at least did die. A Furious Sky is the history of the hurricanes that have hit what is today the United States. But before going any further, I need to define that simple term, which is really quite complex. What is a hurricane? They are violent swirling storms with sustained winds of at least 74 miles per hour. They generally form with the ocean's surface down to a depth of about 150 feet, reaches the trigger temperature of 80 degrees Fahrenheit, providing all the heat energy necessary to power the storm. Two other conditions that are necessary are low vertical wind shear, which keeps the hurricane from being ripped apart, and an abundance of warm, moist air rising off the ocean's surface. As that air rises, it cools and condenses and gives off what is called the latent heat of condensation. And that's the real fuel that keeps the hurricane going. Hurricanes can be anywhere from tens of miles in diameter to upwards of 1,000 miles in diameter and 50,000 feet high. They rotate in a counterclockwise direction in the northern hemisphere and clockwise in the southern hemisphere. They're characterized by extremely low pressure and a relatively calm center called the eye, with the most ferocious winds occurring in the eye wall. And here you see the amphitheater-like eye wall of a major hurricane. Hurricanes have had a significant impact on the course of American history. For example, two strong hurricanes that swept through the Caribbean in 1780 killed more than 20,000 people and destroyed many British and French naval ships that were in the area, using it as a staging location. Now, that horrible hurricane season convinced the French that they didn't want to be around in 1781 during the hurricane season. So they spent the winter of 1780 and 81 fixing up their fleet, and they decided to sail north in the summer of 1781 for two reasons. First, to escape the hurricane season, but also, just as important and actually more important for us, they decided to aid their allies in the American Revolution, us, in our battle against the British. And by going north, the French fleet played a critical role in the Battle of the Chesapeake and our military victory over General Charles Cornwallis, when he surrendered to George Washington on September 19th, 1781, a major turning point in the war that kickstarted negotiations for peace. Now, of course, hurricanes didn't cease with the founding of the United States. In the last 238 years, there have been hundreds of hurricanes that have struck our shores. One of those was called the Great September Gale of 1615, which was just a hurricane by another name. And this painting, which came out a few years after the Great September Gale, shows what the artist felt downtown Providence looked like during the height of the storm, a rather dramatic painting. The Galveston Hurricane of 1900 leveled the city and killed at least 6,000 people, perhaps as many as 8,000 or 10,000 people. Hard to know because there were a lot of tourists in town at the time. It is, to this point, still the deadliest hurricane in American history. The Labor Day Hurricane of 1935 ripped through some camps down in the Florida Keys where World War I veterans were working on building a highway that stretched all the way to Key West. It is still the most intensive Category 5 hurricane to hit the United States mainland, with maximum sustained winds of 185 miles per hour and gusts of over 200 miles per hour. At one of the work camps, a doctor came upon a veteran named Elmer Cressberg, who had a 2x4 that went clear through his chest just below the rib cage. He was still alive, amazingly, and rather calm under the circumstances. The doctor told him he wanted to pull out the piece of wood and offered Elmer a shot of morphine to dull the pain. Cressberg refused, telling the doctor it didn't matter since he was going to die as soon as the wood was removed. What he really wanted was a last drink. and he asked for 2 beers, which were quickly provided. After finishing them, Cressberg said, "Now pull." The doctor did, and Cressberg died. The Great Hurricane of 1938 delivered a body blow to New England, resulting in damages of $300 to $400 million and killing at least 680 people. It was still is the most destructive natural disaster ever to strike New England. The actress Katharine Hepburn, who by this point had already won her first Oscar, was at her family's Victorian summer home on the edge of the water in Old Saybrook, Connecticut, when the hurricane struck. She and 5 other people escaped the house as it was being ripped apart and torn from its foundation, and they sought refuge as a nearby inn, which was on a slight hill, and it was closed for the season. So they broke into the inn, basically. And looking back, Hepburn would later recall, "We saw the house slowly turn around, sail off to the northeast, and start down the brook into the swamp lagoon. It just sailed away, easy as pie." Later, she called her father in Hartford. When she told him that the house was gone, he responded, "I suppose you didn't have brains enough to throw in a match before it disappeared. I'm insured for fire." Hurricane Camille in August 1969 clobbered coastal Mississippi. Of the many people who suffered during Camille, none had it worse than Paul Williams Sr., the longtime caretaker at the Trinity Episcopal Church in Pass Christian. The night that Camille came ashore, Paul and his wife Myrtle and most of their children chose not to evacuate. Instead, they went into the auditorium, which was connected to the church. The hurricane demolished the auditorium, and in the end, 11 of Paul's children perished, along with 1 grandchild and his beloved wife, Myrtle. Hurricane Andrew struck Miami on August 24th, 1992. It tore a 30-mile wide swath of destruction through Miami-Dade County. A staggering 126,000 homes were damaged or destroyed, making more than 160,000 people homeless overnight. Total damage approached $27 billion. Zoo Miami was especially hard hit. About 300 rare birds were lost when the zoo's aviary was smashed. To shelter the Caribbean flamingos, the zoo's staff herded them into one of the men's bathrooms, and that's the picture that is shown here. Now, hurricanes rarely strike Hawaii, but there have been a few of note. The most memorable being Hurricane Iniki, which made landfall on the Hawaiian island of Kauai on September 11th, 1992. It killed 6 people and cost $3.1 billion and shattered the tourist industry for a number of years. It also forced director Steven Spielberg to cancel the final day of shooting for his first film, Jurassic Park. Not his first film, but the first Jurassic Park film. Everyone associated with the movie crammed into the ballroom at the Westin Kauai Hotel to take shelter from the storm. During the hurricane, Spielberg and a couple of his cameramen walked down to the shore to take pictures or some film of the massive waves striking the island. And actually, if you remember the movie, there is a scene that looks like that, and that was from actual footage of Hurricane Iniki. The crew survived, so did Spielberg, and a few weeks later, Spielberg filmed one last scene on Oahu, since the hurricane had destroyed all the film sets on Kauai. At the end of August 2005, Hurricane Katrina ravaged parts of Florida, Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana, costing $125 billion, making it by far the most expensive single hurricane in American history. It left about 1,800 people dead in Mississippi and Louisiana, with Louisiana taking the lion's share. Ground zero for Katrina was the city of New Orleans, which suffered the most devastating blow. Multiple levee failures around New Orleans left 80% of the city submerged in water that was up to 10 feet deep. There was so much pollution in the water that they dubbed it hazmat gumbo. 7 years after Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Sandy, which some of you might remember because some of its remnants struck us, Struck New Jersey and New York on Monday, October 29th, 2012, killing more than 150 people and resulting in $65 billion worth of damage. Because it struck near Halloween, it was dubbed Frankenstorm. Sandy's waves pounded the shore with such force that their vibrations were picked up by seismographs nearly 2,500 miles away in Seattle. New York was particularly hard hit. Many subway lines and automobile tunnels were flooded. At one point, close to 1 million Con Edison customers in and around the city had lost electricity. And if you remember, one of the things that you saw on the news right after Hurricane Sandy was an amazing shot of this crane, which was on top of a pencil-thin building, skyscraper that was being built in New York City on the edge of Central Park called 197. And the crane had been sort of bent over, crumpled in two by the winds. And I always found that fascinating. A lot of you probably know that there are these very thin skyscrapers right along Central Park that are among the most expensive pieces of real estate in the world. And that 197 has had apartments which have sold for $80 million to $100 million a piece. It has nothing to do with hurricanes, but just absolutely fascinates me that we live in a world where things like that actually happen. And the hits just kept on coming. The 2017 hurricane season turned out to be one for the record books. In the end, there were 10 hurricanes, 6 of which were major. 4 of those hurricanes roared ashore. But what really set 2017 apart was that 3 out of the 4 hurricanes that made landfall were major ones. Each of those were Category 4s with winds of at least 130 miles per hour. Never before had there been 3 Category 4s that made landfall in a single year. The damage attributed to hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria totaled $265 billion, making 2017 the most expensive hurricane season we've ever had. Hurricane Harvey dumped more than 50 inches of rain on Houston within 48 hours, and it doused Nederland, Texas, with a shocking deluge of 60.58 inches, the record for a single rainfall. Hurricane Irma maintained winds of 185 miles per hour for an astonishing 35 hours over the open Atlantic, setting a world record for sustained intensity. And when it struck Florida, which you can see here in the upper left-hand corner, it destroyed 50% of the orange crop. Hurricane Maria made landfall in Puerto Rico as a strong Category 3 hurricane, a strong Category 4, with winds of 155 miles per hour, and it dumped up to 3 feet of water in some areas. Maria damaged or obliterated virtually every human-made structure on the island outside of the capital of San Juan and many within San Juan. It left 3.4 million people without electricity. The death toll from Maria has spawned considerable controversy, with estimates ranging from 1,400 to 4,700. While Furious Sky details some of the most destructive hurricanes to reach our shores, it also recounts pivotal discoveries over the past 3 centuries in the fields of meteorology, aviation, and communications, which have greatly improved our ability to understand, monitor, and report on hurricanes. For example, after studying a hurricane that moved from Philadelphia to Boston in 1743, Benjamin Franklin, our founding scientist, became the first person to realize that hurricanes had forward movement and that a hurricane's winds could blow contrary to the direction in which it was moving. During the Great Storm controversy in the mid-1800s, arguments between amateur and professional meteorologists helped to develop the basic image of a hurricane as a mass of swirling, moisture-laden winds, the velocity of which greatly increases as one approaches the center of the storm until one enters the calm, clear, and surprisingly beautiful eye. The advent of the telegraph, then the radio, followed by hurricane hunter planes and Earth-orbiting satellites, all contributed mightily to our ability to monitor hurricanes from their inception to dissolution. Such advances, combined with vast improvements in computer-based weather prediction models, means that hurricanes can no longer sneak up on us, and we know their course and roughly their time of arrival. There have also been dramatic changes in the way we identify hurricanes. In 1953, the Weather Bureau, the precursor of the National Weather Service, began naming hurricanes after women. This decision angered many who thought it was inappropriate, if not downright insulting, to name hurricanes in this manner, and they asked the Bureau to reconsider. One woman was particularly upset. She said she would rather have an unnamed hurricane hit her house than a hurricane named after one of her husband's former girlfriends. The Bureau, however, would not be swayed. It stuck fast to its naming system, making it permanent in 1956. Protests died down, that is, until Roxy Bolton spoke up. Bolton was a vice president of the National Organization for Women from Florida. In 1970, she urged the National Weather Service to stop naming hurricanes after women. She was tired of reading and hearing media accounts in which female named hurricanes were variously described as vicious, capricious, furious, bad girls, unladylike, and treacherous. She said women are human beings and deeply resent being arbitrarily associated with disaster. Bolton offered some alternatives. Hurricanes could, she said, be named after birds or perhaps US senators who liked having things named after them. She also recommended that hurricanes be called himicanes instead. The service refused to budge. Then, during Jimmy Carter's presidency, US Secretary of Commerce Dr. Juanita Krebs, the first woman to hold that job, she was a self-described feminist. She heartily supported Bolton's initiative. And in 1979, gender equality won out over tired bureaucracy. From that point forward, Atlantic tropical storms and hurricanes would alternate between male and female names. Now, you know, last year we went well beyond the male and female name list and we had to go into the Greek alphabet. Apparently, enough of you, not necessarily people watching, but enough people complained about the Greek alphabet being somewhat confusing that recently the World Meteorological Organization has decided that if we ever find ourselves in that situation again, and we exhaust the 21 male and female names in the original list, we will go on to a second list of male and female names. So there will be no more Greek named hurricanes or tropical storms. Now the cycle continues. Every year a new hurricane season unfolds. No matter what an individual hurricane season brings, one thing is certain. The United States will continue to be pummeled by these tremendous storms, and because of global warming, future hurricanes will likely be stronger than those of the past. Global warming has already made the impact of hurricanes worse. Because sea level has risen as a result of the thermal expansion of the oceans and the melting of the glaciers, storm surges associated with hurricanes are higher and more destructive. For example, in New York City, 100 years ago, the average height of the sea level was 1 foot below what it is today. So that additional foot means that the same hurricane hitting 100 years ago and hitting today would have had another foot in elevation to cause damage. A growing number of studies have found strong evidence linking global warming to increased precipitation during hurricanes. The reason is that warming leads to more evaporation, and warmer air is able to contain higher concentrations of moisture, which can come down as rain. Considerable research also predicts that warmer oceans, which provide more heat energy to the storm, will make the winds produced by these hurricanes stronger and more powerful. Thus, under the warmer conditions that predictions say will be the norm towards the end of this century, it is likely that hurricanes will be stronger and wetter. And there is a lot of recent, not a lot, but there's a fair amount of recent research which points to hurricanes in a warmer world traveling slower. That means they'll linger longer. And just remember what happened with Hurricane Harvey. It was barely a Category 1 hurricane when it struck, but since it hung around for nearly 48 hours, it had an opportunity to dump biblical amounts of rain on that part of Texas. So if hurricanes move more slowly, not only will we get more rain coming down in one area, but the winds will have more time to wreak devastation. At this moment, nobody can say with absolute certainty exactly how hurricanes will change over time as a result of global warming. Scientists would be the first to admit that there are still many unknowns, as well as limitations in data and modeling that make it exceedingly difficult to predict the impact of a warmer world on these massive storms. The mounting scientific consensus that an increase in global warming will likely make future hurricanes worse, however, is not encouraging. But even if global warming makes no difference at all in hurricane behavior, society still has to grapple with a hurricane-filled future. And as more and more people move to the coast, the potential impact of hurricanes will only increase. This is a picture, probably many of you know, of Miami Beach, South Beach. I've only been there once, and boy, is that area exposed to hurricanes, and it has been walloped a number of times in the past. Now, as this book was heading into the final stage of production, Hurricane Dorian riveted the nation. Beginning in late August of 2019, Americans watched the round-the-clock coverage as this rapidly intensifying storm traveled across the Atlantic. Each day, reports became more alarming as Dorian not only grew into a monster Category 5 storm, but also appeared to be heading directly for the east coast of the United States. But first in line were the Bahamas, parts of which were utterly destroyed by Dorian, which essentially stalled in place for nearly 2 days before moving on as a Category 2 hurricane. Some models said it would still strike the eastern United States, and that caused mandatory evacuations from Florida to Virginia. Over the next few days, Dorian hugged the coastline, briefly regaining Category 3 status as it moved over warmer waters and interacted with the Gulf Stream, then dropping to a Category 1 hurricane just before making its only landfall in the United States at Cape Hatteras, another area that has been struck by a lot of hurricanes over the years. After that, Dorian zoomed off in a northeasterly direction, making landfall for a second time in Nova Scotia, where it left 400,000 people without electricity. While Dorian's impact in the United States was significant, it was virtually nothing compared with what happened to the Bahamas and what might have happened had the hurricane plowed head-on into the coast instead of skirting the mainland and only clipping North Carolina before sailing off into the Northeast Atlantic. This time, America was lucky, but if the history of hurricanes tells us anything, it is that that luck will not last. And here's the last slide. That is me when I had brown hair, not gray hair. That's back in 1991, I recall, after Hurricane Bob slammed into Massachusetts. My wife, Jennifer, worked for the state of Massachusetts at the time on a tree-related program, and they asked her to go down to Falmouth to see what the damage was. And this is a summer cottage on the beach in Falmouth, right next to the bike path and running path. If any of you have ever run in the Woods Hole 10K, you would have gone right by this. And I was there just tagging along while she took photographs. I still miss that Hawaiian shirt, but I no longer have it. And with that, I'm done. So let me hit stop share so I can, hi. And I have to say, it was very interesting during that giving my talk. Bethany disappeared, and in its place, she put a picture of a donkey. And
How did you tell the difference?
so I was looking at it, and yesterday I went for a bike ride up to Manchester. I live in Marblehead. I went for a bike ride up to Manchester by the Sea through Wenham and Beverly. And in Wenham, I passed a house that had 4 horses and a donkey. And I got off my bike. I took a picture of them, and it was fascinating. I went up to the rock wall, and all of them looked at me, and I think they all had malice in their eyes. If I had gotten into that ring, I think they would have attacked me. But anyway, I took a picture of him.
Well, that donkey is a very special donkey. That's Roger from the Spencer Pierce Little Farm. So he's my buddy donkey. But no comment on what I think of myself personally, but that is my profile picture. And donkeys are often kept for protection, so it's possible that they would have gone after you. But anyway.
Yeah.
not too likely. Thank you so much, Eric. That was completely fascinating. And I just, again, one of our favorite books around the house. We have a couple questions from your wonderful listeners. And
Okay.
one is sort of an interesting combination of sort of an art question and a science question. Why is the eye of a storm so beautiful?
Well, basically because it's clear you have this massive hurricane coming in, causing destruction, gloomy, gray skies, lots of wind, and then all of a sudden, the eye passes overhead, and the sun usually comes out. The winds die down to barely a whisper, and you think the hurricane's over. In fact, no longer. I think most people know about the eye of the hurricane. But one of the things that happened during the Great Miami Hurricane of 1926 is when the eye passed over Miami Beach, hundreds, if not thousands of people came out of their houses. And a lot of them tried to drive across the causeway back into Miami. And before they made it back, the hurricane came roaring back in. And a lot of those cars were flung off the bridge. And a lot of people died. The local meteorologist ran out of his building screaming at people to get back inside, but he could only reach the people within 100 or 200 feet of him. So it's beautiful because we all like sunny skies and nice wispy clouds. And in the eye of a hurricane, it's often sunny, not always, but it is very calm. And it's like you've just come through this battle, and all of a sudden everything's nice and quiet and beautiful. And it is beautiful. I think there have probably been some good paintings of hurricane eyes. I don't think I ran across any, but I'm sure somebody's painted the eye of a hurricane.
Well, it's a trap. Sounds like a
Yeah,
trap.
it's a trap.
So I have a question from Leslie. Do you have anything to say about the surprise hurricane on Watch Hill? I have never, I
The
don't know what that is, but maybe you do.
the surprise. Let me remember. She's not talking. I mean, Watch Hill was slammed by the hurricane of 1938, and they may have called it the surprise hurricane because meteorology was such that the Weather Bureau in Washington D.C. didn't forecast the hurricane properly. So it was a very fast moving hurricane, almost 50 to 60 miles per hour, and it caught everybody in Long Island and Rhode Island and New England off guard. They thought there were just going to be some gales that day. So maybe she's referring to that as being the surprise hurricane. I am not aware of another hurricane called the surprise hurricane, but the hurricane of 1938, what it did, if you've ever been to Watch Hill, which is a beautiful area, I've spoken there a number of times, there is a point of land that is now a wildlife refuge. Well, that used to have, I think it was about 50 or 60 homes on it, and they were literally washed away by the hurricane of 1938. And we're lucky that we have satellites and we know hurricanes are coming, but there's still surprises in the last hour or a couple of hours before hurricanes make landfall. They can really move left or right. But just imagine what it must have been like 100 years ago or 200 years ago, and you have no idea that a hurricane is barreling towards you until it's basically too late. So one of the hurricanes I found most fascinating, even though it has very little information surrounding it, is the Great Hurricane of 1935, which smashed into the Plymouth colony and the Massachusetts Bay colony. There's this scene, Governor Bradford wrote about the local Indians fleeing from their wigwams as the storm came up and unfortunately killed many of them as well as some colonists. All right.
Oh, you're speaking my 17th century language there, Eric. I love it. All right, we have an opinion question for you from Janet. What do you think would happen to Plum Island if a Hurricane Sandy type storm hit us?
I think a lot of the houses would be washed away, undercut. The entire profile of the island would change. I mean, just look at what happens when Plum Island gets hit by a good nor'easter. Well, a hurricane, I mean, nor'easters can be as powerful, almost as powerful as hurricanes. They're just sort of cold weather hurricanes. But if a Category 3 hurricane, like the hurricane in 1938, came up the coast, and I think that's more likely now because waters to the north are warmer than they were 50, 60, 70 years ago. So with that warmth, you could sustain the strength of a hurricane more easily. If a Category 3 hurricane or worse slammed into Boston or Plum Island directly, I think it would be a shattering experience. I mean, I've been to Plum Island a number of times, beautiful place. I know that the people who live there have had major battles over the years trying to protect uh, their houses. And that's just with normal weather. If another hurricane comes, if I lived on Plum Island, I would not stay on Plum Island while the hurricane roared in. I would hope for the best. But it's not just Plum Island. Marblehead, where I live, there are some very low areas down in the harbor that periodically get flooded and blasted by nor'easters. Again, if a major hurricane hit anywhere near Boston or the North Shore, it would be traumatic for all of us. I live a quarter of a mile from the ocean. I am sure that my house would have damage. We had a big storm just a year, I think it was 2 years ago. It wasn't a hurricane, it was just a bad nor'easter. And I woke up the next day, our house was fine, but I went out to our backyard. There were 4 or 5 large pieces of roofing material, what do you call them? So shingles. There were shingles in our backyard, and that was just from a storm that had maybe 70-mile-an-hour winds.
Wow. Yeah, we're up on top of a hill here, as you know, so
Yeah.
worry about that all the time. I think we covered this with that wonderful picture of you in your Hawaiian shirt, but Susan asked, okay, have you experienced hurricanes yourself? And tell us a little bit about your experience.
Well, that was an after the fact. No, I get this question a lot about a lot of my books, and I have this silly answer. People say, like I wrote a book about lighthouses. I had never seen more than 1 or 2 lighthouses before I started writing the book. I wrote a book about the fur trade, and I've never trapped a beaver. I wrote a book about whaling. I've never harpooned a whale, although I've gone on whale watches. And I have to admit, sadly enough, that I wrote this book on hurricanes, and the closest I ever came to really experience in a hurricane was, I think it was Hurricane Gloria. The tail end of it came through Boston, if I remember. And I was a graduate student at MIT. And at the height of the hurricane in Boston, when winds were whipping pretty bad, I decided to go for a run along the Charles River. And I'll always remember this. I'm running, and all of a sudden I got hit in the forehead by a large maple leaf. And that sounds silly, but it was traveling so fast and it was wet that it left a little mark on my forehead.
Oh,
So
I'll bet.
that is my most exciting story about a hurricane. I haven't been up in a Hurricane Hunter plane, although I wouldn't say no if somebody invited me. And I haven't, I've seen some bad nor'easters here, but never a hurricane.
I love that. You got slapped by.
I got slapped.
I love it. Ashton asked, what was the highest wind speed in a hurricane? I know the highest in a tornado was 319 miles an hour.
Well, the most powerful hurricane ever in American history was the Labor Day hurricane, and the highest sustained wind speed, which is essentially a wind speed maintained 33 feet above the surface of the earth for at least a minute, was 185 miles per hour. So that's pretty bad. There have been some hurricanes, I can't remember, typhoons, which are just hurricanes by another name, in the Pacific that I think have gone close to 200 miles per hour. What is the upper limit? Well, it's not the sky's the limit, but I'm sure that if you have enough energy and it's warm enough, you can go well above 185 miles per hour. I do not know what the theoretical maximum is, but if you watch The Day After Tomorrow with Jake Gyllenhaal and Dennis Quaid, which was a cold weather hurricane, I mean, those winds look like they were 400 or 500 miles per hour. So I don't know what's going to happen to us.
Absolutely. Well, that's fiction, right?
Yeah, yes, I know.
Good as it is. All right. From Katie, we have a suggestion. She says, thank you for a fascinating presentation. Have you thought about offering this as an audiobook?
It is an audiobook. I'm not all my books have audiobook options. At least my last 6 books, not before that. But no, I've been asked to read before, but I'd go crazy. I would go crazy reading my own book. I just wouldn't do it. So other people read it. Sometimes I've liked the readers, sometimes I haven't. My most popular audiobook is my pirate audiobook, which has done really well. People seem to like it, but then again, some people listen to it and they don't like it that much. This one I haven't listened to, but you can get the audiobook. And I'm gonna tell you, what is it? Is it audiobook? The BookBub? I'm trying to remember. Yeah, no, that's Kindle. Oh, two things I want to tell you real quick. First, if you want to try to get a copy of A Furious Sky, right now on Goodreads, there's a promotion for the next 15 or 18 days where they're giving out 20 free copies of the paperback of A Furious Sky. And so if you sign up on Goodreads, if you use Goodreads, you might win a free paperback. And then in June, I was just told that BookBub, which is this site that offers discounted Kindle ebooks, is going to have my pirate book for a week. And I tell you, boy, that really pops. The last night they did my pirate book once before, and all of a sudden it zoomed up to number 30 on Amazon, on the entire Amazon, just for a day or two. So that was very exciting.
Nice. Nice. Okay, question from Vicky. How does Katrina compare with other hurricanes? And why was it so much more destructive than other storms?
Well, it's the most expensive hurricane we've ever had. And the reason it was the most expensive is because it plowed into New Orleans, which is, in hindsight, not a place you should have built a city. Much of New Orleans is on average 6 feet below sea level. It was built on very swampy terrain. It's not the ideal place to build a city. And they had levees in New Orleans back in the early 1800s to deal with storm surge. And because so many salt marshes and coastal barrier islands have been destroyed over the years, the protective natural girdle that was around New Orleans is largely gone. So it's sort of a sitting duck, so to speak. And it's even worse than that. After Hurricane Katrina, they invested, I think, 90 or $100 billion to restore the levees and the walls and put in a new pumping system to help New Orleans deal with another Katrina-like hurricane over the next 100 years, or maybe even one that's worse. Well, unfortunately, the Army Corps of Engineers came out with a study last year or 2 years ago that showed that this massive construction project, which was really expensive and they thought was going to solve the problem, this massive construction project is already starting to fail. And because of its massive weight, it is sinking into the substrate. So it is not even giving as much protection as they said it would. And they're trying to figure out right now what to do to help strengthen the armor around New Orleans. But yeah, I love New Orleans. I've been there. It's a fun place. People often ask me, although nobody's asked me, would I live right on the coast? Well, I live on the coast now, but I would personally, well, first of all, I couldn't afford to live on the coast in most areas in the United States. But if I could, I would not live in an area that was in a 100-year floodplain. I would not live with, only 3, 4, 5 feet above sea level, no matter how beautiful the house is. One of the things in Marblehead, there are some houses that are very low down, but there are also some bluffs and rocky ledges that are 30, 40 feet high and houses on top of that. Well, that's going to survive global climate change or a major storm. But I would be very nervous if I had a house in an area that's prone to hurricanes that is very low down. But then again, the federal government helps you out by federal flood insurance. And fortunately or unfortunately, most people who live on the coast are rich. And if you have deep pockets, you can afford to sustain a major shock. Even your house washing out to sea, you can rebuild and maybe build better.
Yeah, I think you know too much at this point to to not think very carefully about where you live, for sure.
Right.
All right, we have time for one last question. This is a question from Pamela. This is a little look to the future. Can you talk about some of the scientific and technological advances we have besides satellites for understanding and predicting hurricanes?
Well, the main one, and I got to tell you, there's a lot of physics involved in understanding hurricanes, that well beyond me. But in reading a lot of the books, I think one of the areas where they're really getting better and better is in the prediction area. There's a certain limit because of chaos theory and the way the atmosphere works to predicting any natural event, any weather-related event more than about 2 weeks out. But these massive computer programs and models and the knowledge base, the historical knowledge base of meteorologists, I think is combining to make the forecasts better. It's not, I don't think there's going to be another quantum leap like there was between now and 60 years ago, but we will get better. And hopefully people will get better at responding to calls to evacuate. But we're never going to get to the point where we know 4 weeks out where a hurricane's going to hit, or even a week out, probably exactly where a hurricane's going to hit. But predictions are getting better. And that's a good thing, because in a warmer world, we're probably going to be dealing with major hurricanes more often.
Absolutely. Okay, that's the last word from Eric J. Dolan. Get out when they tell you to get out. That's our takeaway from that. Thank you so much, Eric. Thank you to everyone here who hopped on to listen to this talk. Thank you for your support of the Literary Festival. And I will tell you, there are some questions we didn't get to. I know that Eric J. Dolan has a wonderful Facebook presence. It's very entertaining and informative. So I'm sure folks can pop on and ask questions there if they didn't get around to it here. All right, wonderful.
Well, thank you.
Thank you all. Lovely to see you, and hope you enjoy the rest of the festival day. Bye, Eric.
Bye-bye.